Why, hello there. Thank you for tuning in for another ASMR story time. For today's video, I decided to choose the country of Uruguay, mainly because in my last video discussing Romania's history, that was a suggested country that I thought was quite underrated, and I love their flag. I find it very beautiful. So we're going to be discussing Spain's first contact with the land that is now known as Uruguay, and detailing in an immersive fashion the explorers' lives that discovered and settled Uruguay. So, as I did before, I will be referring to my notes to the side, namely because it makes it much easier to kind of guide myself. So, let us begin. We're going to begin with the shores of Rio de la Plata. It's a land of rolling plains and silver rivers, a land that will one day be called Uruguay. But first, it was a frontier that was awaiting the steady hand of an empire, a canvas waiting to be filled with the brushstrokes of an empire. In the year 1516, the Spanish crown sent an expedition to explore the southern reaches of the Americas. At its helm was Juan Díaz de Solís. He was a seasoned navigator and a royal pilot. He sailed into the estuary of the Rio de la Plata, a vast shimmering gateway. I'm going to push it back a little bit. There we go. A vast shimmering gateway between the Atlantic and the heart of South America. Solís was not driven by fantasy, but by duty. He was serving his crown. To chart new waters, to expand the reach of Spain, España, to find a passage to the riches of the East. He and his crew landed on the eastern bank, what we now call Uruguay. But their arrival was met with hostility. People who inhabited the lands, although sparse, Uruguay wasn't that densely populated like Central America or northern South America. But the people that inhabited the land did not like newcomers. They didn't like people different from themselves. These people were very hostile to the navigators, to the explorers. Solís and several men were killed in a skirmish with local tribes, and the expedition retreated. Yet even in death, Solís opened the door. His maps, his journals, and of course, his courage became the foundation for future Spanish ventures. The next explorer that braved that new world was Sebastián Cabot. He wasn't necessarily Spanish, but fun fact, Latin America is largely composed, especially the more southern you go, of Italians, French, Portuguese, obviously, and Spanish, obviously, descendants. So it's not just those of Spanish heritage, it is all of Southern Europe. The majority of the Italian diaspora went to South America. Only a fraction went to North America, namely to Argentina, which is densely populated by Italian descendants, hence why their Spanish kind of sounds Italian. Anyways, back to the history tale. A decade later, in 1526, another explorer arrived, Sebastián Cabot, an Italian in Spanish service. He had sailed with Magellan and now led his own expedition. Cabot ventured up the Rio de la Plata. He founded San Lázaro, the first European settlement in Uruguay. It was modest, a small outpost, but it marked the beginning of Spain's physical presence in the region. It's kind of like planting a flag on the moon. They planted the flag on the New World. Cabot's men built rudimentary structures. They traded, they scouted, and they endured. Though the settlement was short-lived, it proved that Spain could survive here and that the land was worth claiming. Cabot's reports spoke of fertile soil, abundant rivers, and strategic value. Spain, of course, took notice. The land did present, as was the case with all of Central and South America, its own challenges. Uruguay was not a land of gold, unlike Colombia. It held no great cities and no empires to conquer, unlike the territories in northern South America and Central America. But Uruguay was rich in many other ways. The grasslands were perfect for cattle. The rivers offered trade routes, and the coastline provided access to the Atlantic. In fact, Argentina, Uruguay, I think Bolivia, have topography that's more comparable to Switzerland. It's very European in their presentation. And I think because it was sparsely populated, that European influence, especially in generations to come, is far more notable than the conflicts that you get in northern South America and Central America due to those cultural and ethnic conflicts. Yet, the Spanish did face resistance in inhabiting the land. The Charrúa and other tribes were fiercely territorial. They did not value multiculturalism or existing with different people. That was not particularly a value to them. They did not welcome outsiders, and they did not easily change their ways. Spain responded with strategy, not romanticism and not idealism, but with fortifications, missions, and persistence. Later, about 200 years later, I believe, in 1726, Spain founded Montevideo. It is the stronghold of the empire in Uruguay. It was a fortified city on the southern coast, built to conquer Portuguese expansion from Brazil. A funny detail that I find funny is that Spain and Portugal obviously were fighting, but not like in a like Spain versus England sort of way, but just kind of in a sibling rivalry over Latin America. And Spain kind of wanted to make sure that Portugal couldn't get the entirety of the continent, although Portugal did obviously get Brazil, who speaks Portuguese, which I'm kind of glad that Portuguese and Spanish have a lot of like overlap, because I'm really trying to find, okay, side note, I'm gonna get deviated, okay? I'm getting distracted down a tangent. But if anyone knows where I can watch Ilha Furacão to stream, let me know. And I also recommend watching Ilha Furacão because I just watch clips of it and it's just like, I don't know. It's my own feminine sensibilities. It looks like a great like soap drama, or how do you say it? Yeah, like soap opera. Anyways, back to the story. So, it was a fortified city on the southern coast, built to counter Portuguese expansion from Brazil and to secure Spain's grip on the Rio de la Plata. I think something, to go on another tangent, that people oftentimes forget now in this modern world is the importance and value of geographic ownership. People kind of have this concept, I think, due to an ignorance of geography, that they don't quite understand the value, not only of having land, but of having trade routes, waterways. There's a current push to own both the Panama Canal and this one route that goes through Greenland. Because if you own both the Panama Canal and this route that goes through Greenland, then you have a monopoly in global travel and global trade. So right now, some superpowers in the world are trying to like soft power their way into grabbing those waterways or routes for themselves. And objectively, I just find that very interesting. Anyways, Montevideo was more than a military post. It became a hub of commerce, culture, and colonial administration. Spanish architects laid out streets, plazas, and churches. Keep in mind, these things had not yet been established yet. Soldiers guarded the port. Merchants traded goods from Europe and the Americas. Montevideo grew. Its walls stood firm, and its people carried the traditions of Spain. In 1776, so about 50 years later, Spain reorganized its South American territories. Uruguay became part of the viceroyalty of the Rio de la Plata, with Buenos Aires as its capital. This new structure brought order. It streamlined trade, improved governance, and reinforced loyalty to the crown. Spanish law, Spanish currency, Spanish customs, all flowed through the viceroyalty. Viceroy, early in the morning. Uruguay's role was strategic. Its port, its livestock, its location made it a valuable piece of the imperial puzzle. Now we're going to cover the Gauchos. They are considered the sons of the Spanish Empire. From the fusion of Spanish settlers and frontier life emerged the Gaucho, a rugged horseman, a symbol of independence and skill, but also a product of Spanish tradition. Gauchos spoke Spanish. They wore Spanish-style clothing. They used Spanish saddles and Spanish blades. They herded cattle across the pampas. They lived by codes of honor. That's something that's greatly lost nowadays, unfortunately, but it's whose fault if not our own? And they defended the land from invaders. The Gaucho was not a rebel. He was a guardian of Spanish values in the New World. Spain did not conquer with words, swords alone. It brought faith. It brought a sense of equal value of human life, where just because you conquer someone doesn't mean you just sacrifice their life to the sun god, or just because you need some tributes, you then sacrifice them so that way clouds come. Jesuit and Franciscan missionaries arrived in the 17th century. They built missions, taught Spanish, and spread Catholicism. Which, I mean, whenever there's like Mormon missionaries that go to South America, I'm like, you're a little too late. It's been like 500 years. We're good. It's cool. Don't worry about it. These missions were centers of learning, of agriculture, of community. Could you imagine if the Mormons had colonized South America and like all the Mayans and Aztec became Mormons? That would be interesting. Hilarious and interesting. Anyways, the faith itself offered structure, and they helped pacify the frontier, bring the blades down, value harmony and cohesion. The Spanish church became a pillar of society. It influenced and shaped Uruguay's moral compass, and its legacy endures to this day. But of course, there was a road to independence for Uruguay, as was the case with all Latin American countries. The empire fell. In 1810, revolution erupted in Buenos Aires, and by 1811, Uruguay joined the call among the Latin American countries for independence. José Gervasio Artigas emerged as a leader, a man of vision and defiance. He rallied the gauchos, the farmers, the frontier folk, against Spanish rule, and later against Brazilian and Portuguese forces. Artigas admired Spanish ideals, but he sought autonomy. A Uruguay governed by its own people. And to this day, Uruguay actually functions pretty well. I mean, there's issues with, which is the case with pretty much all countries, but it really doesn't have the same issues that northern South America, let alone Central America, has. It's been pretty decent. Economically speaking, I can't quite comment though. I think all of Latin America struggles economically. His movement was complex, not anti-Spanish, but pro-freedom. A lot of the independence movements that came from those previously mentioned countries in northern South America and Central America were anti-Spanish for the obvious reasons that they were led by those who were not necessarily, and also largely composed of those that were not necessarily Spanish. In Uruguay, it was predominantly Spanish descendants just wanting their own, as they said, autonomy. Spain's influence waned, but its legacy remained. Uruguay declared independence in 1825 and became a sovereign nation in 1830. Yet the Spanish imprint endured. The language, the architecture stunning, the religion all remained deeply Spanish. Uruguay did not reject Spain. It evolved from it. The colonial cities, the legal code, the cultural norms were not erased, they were inherited. So, a gentle reflection that I will leave you guys with. Today, Uruguay stands as a proud republic. Truly, honestly, if it's similar to Argentina, but not, obviously not Argentina, but that entire land is just stunning. It's like, once again, it's like Switzerland. But its soul still whispers in Spanish. Its streets echo with colonial charm. Its traditions, its cuisine, its faith all carry the fingerprints of Spain. From the first explorers to the builders of the Montevideo, from the missionaries to the gauchos, Spain's legacy lives on. In every whispered prayer, every cobbled street, every lullaby. So as you drift into sleep, let the waves of history wash over you. Let the echoes of empire lull you into dreams of ships, of cities, of stories that shaped a nation, from the first Spanish footsteps to the birth of independence. And I also think it's quite interesting that, once again, there's countries that break off from the empire, such as the United States, Uruguay, Australia, New Zealand, who do so not because they necessarily hate their own identity or hate England or Spain or Portugal, but because they desire freedom, autonomy, and self-governance. And then there's independence movements led by those who despise those countries, which oftentimes, as is the case now that we see in modern day Central America and Northern South America, it devolves into complete chaos. But with that, I will leave you with the history of Uruguay from the first Spanish contact to its independence. Buenas noches, and thank you for listening.